Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to Dedicated Father Found Dead, the family that slays.
Broken from the inside out. And the shards of glass that were left behind on the window, if someone would have come through that window, they would have bled significantly. They would have really injured themselves. And there was no sign of that.
This wasn't an accident, and it didn't look like a robbery either. Alberto's family hadn't even moved into the house yet. There was nothing there to steal.
The walls were bare. There was no running water. It was basically a storage room. The blood evidence suggested that he was shot where he was laying. That wasn't abnormal. And it appeared that he'd only been shot once in the head. I thought this very well could be a suicide.
Times were tough for Alberto. There weren't many construction jobs out there, and his family was about to lose their house.
He felt that he was failing his family now because he couldn't find work to provide for him the way he had before.
Alberto had his moments when he seemed really down a lot.
He was broke. The conditions that he was living in, he had no job. It was the perfect scenario for someone to be depressed and not want to live anymore.
You could see how they would think it was a suicide. But if Alberto had shot himself, wouldn't there be a gun next to him?
The fact that we didn't find a gun didn't necessarily mean that it was not a suicide.
Sometimes family members will do whatever they can to hide the fact that a loved one has committed suicide.
It was Alberto's wife, Laura, who found him. And she was in the house for a long time before she went for help.
What was it that she was doing in there? We thought maybe she had picked up the gun and was trying to hide that from us. Maybe she didn't want us to know that he had committed suicide.
The suicide theory. That lasted less than 24 hours. The next day, the medical examiner found not one, but two bullet holes in Alberto's head, and they were shot from two different directions.
There's no possibility that he would have committed suicide. You don't shoot yourself twice.
Alberto could have told them it wasn't a suicide. He wouldn't have done that to his family and Laura, even though they'd been separated for a while.
They'd had some problems. He loved his children very much, and his wife. He wanted the family back together. He wanted things the way they were before.
A fresh start and a new house. Alberto was working overtime to make it happen.
Some water damage on the floor, but nothing major. I mean, it could be fixed. It's fixable, you know.
Alberto loved this place, and he wanted him and Laura to move here after he fixed the house up.
It was always about family for Alberto. Married 13 years, 5 kids. Nothing meant more.
He always cared more about them and their well-being and making sure he always put food on the table and, pay the bills.
He doesn't even grab a penny out of the bank account to eat because he makes sure his family has everything. Sometimes I just tell him, bro, you need to save some money so you can eat. I don't care if I don't eat, my family's first.
It was tragic. A good father and husband. Murdered. Anyone who's ever watched a detective movie knows the wife is always a suspect. However, in Alberto's case, Laura wasn't the killer. But the way she was acting was kind of suspicious.
My first impressions of Laura were somewhat convoluted. I was looking at her as a grieving widow, but then the detective side of me kicked in and I started paying attention to her demeanor and her attitude, and it just didn't sit well with me.
She didn't seem upset at the fact that he was dead.
There was no show of emotion. Her face didn't change. There was no tears. There was nothing. If a normal person, if they'd gone in and their husband or a member of the family wouldn't wake up, they would be hysterical. To me, it was very scary.
She just nervous acting. I thought it was pretty phony, but that's just me. I didn't believe her story. I thought she was lying.
one thing that I noticed right away was as soon as you walk into the room where the victim was laying was a perfectly set lunch, how it was set down so neatly on such a small table.
See the breakfast set down undisturbed perfectly, and it just didn't seem right.
Questions and more questions.
I just was making breakfast next door.
She had a story, and she stuck to the story, and that was it. She never went away from her story.
There was something very mysterious about her, and something that was telling my intuition to look further into exactly who she was and what she was telling us.
Laura was ready to get away from there, and her son Eric came to the rescue.
When Eric got there to pick Laura up, they didn't ask where his remains were going to be taken to. They didn't ask about when they could start making arrangements. They just left. After Laura left the scene, I didn't feel comfortable with the story that Laura had given us. We decided to go to Merced to her house and perform what we call a gunshot residue test on her.
Had Laura been near a gun that had just been fired? Yes, she had.
After we got the results, it made us think that maybe she shot him. We thought maybe that she was in there when either he was being shot or she was shooting him.
But she wasn't there, and she thought a polygraph test would prove it.
She volunteered without any hesitation and took the test and failed miserably. The polygraph examiner told her that she was being deceitful. She responded to the polygraph examiner with, "This is my truth."
Laura is looking really guilty for someone who didn't pull the trigger. Alberto Macias is laying in the morgue with 2 bullet holes in his head, and his wife Laura is looking like the prime suspect. But she couldn't have killed Alberto. She was cooking breakfast at the neighbor's house when he was murdered. Someone else had to be involved. And yes, someone else was acting suspicious the day of his murder.
I recall when Eric showed up to the scene, there was no emotion.
I came over to tell him that I was sorry about his father, and when I did, he showed no emotion either. He just kind of brushed me off and said, "Oh well."
That was one of the things that really stood out as odd to me. Eric's stepfather, Laura's husband, was lying dead, a victim of gunshot. And there were no signs of any interest on what we were going to be doing with our loved one. Eric was very quiet and withdrawn, didn't really say much to us. It was almost like he wanted to avoid us.
Maybe he was just worried about his mom. What a shock for the whole family. With Alberto gone, Eric was now the man of the house. That's a lot of responsibility. But he could handle it. He's a smart one. Salutatorian at his high school graduation.
Alberto was proud of his intelligence and the fact that he was doing well, and that he was really going to become somebody.
Eric was a quiet, humble child. He was a honor roll student. He kept to himself. He was what we would describe as a loner.
He'd never been in trouble with the law. He was a good kid, the first in the family to go to college. In fact, he was in class the morning Alberto was killed. At least he said he was.
And we found out that Eric had actually taken a semester off of school, and so that couldn't have been possible.
And something else turned out not to be true. Eric said he didn't have a cell phone with him that day, that it was broken.
We were able to track his travelings and daily activities from the use of his cell phone. It showed that he was in the Dos Palos and Los Banos area, where the crime was committed. Eric was very reluctant to answer some questions, and at times it was frustrating trying to communicate with him because he just didn't want to talk.
But there was one thing he didn't mind talking about.
What do you know about life insurance policies?
My dad had 3 life insurance policies.
He knew dollar amounts of life insurance policies.
One was Lincoln, one was Farm.
He knew everything about the mom and dad's personal business, short of account numbers. To my disbelief, there were 3 different life insurance policies totaling $975,000. I found that to be odd with a house that's in foreclosure, living in the house like Alberto was living in, unemployed, what would they need $975,000 in life insurance for?
Who knows if Alberto even knew it was worth $1 million? Dead, of course. And who would get all that money? His loving wife and stepson. Laura hadn't done too well on her polygraph. But Eric, he was good at taking tests. Except for this one. He failed. But lucky Eric, he got to go home anyway. There just wasn't enough evidence to hold him. Good thing, too, because there was lots of family business to take care of, like calling Alberto's brother to tell him the bad news.
Eric called me and says, well, my dad is gone. And he hung up. I call again and he says, yeah, he's dead. But there was no remorse or nothing. And he hung up again. So I was like, wow.
Eric also had to save their house from being taken by the bank, which meant getting his hands on the insurance money. Fast.
One of the life insurance companies said that the morning after Alberto was killed, Eric called them and asked them how he could make a claim on a life insurance policy. Who does that the day after a murder?
I'm here to discuss my stepfather's life insurance policies.
Eric called every day for weeks. Guess he didn't know they don't pay out if there's an open murder investigation.
I got daily phone calls from the life insurance companies asking me if I could exclude Laura Hernandez or Eric Hernandez as suspects in this case because they were the beneficiaries on the life insurance policies. I continued to tell the life insurance companies that I could not do that. They were the prime suspects in the case.
So they ended up losing the house, and Laura and the kids had to move.
They began to rent another home in a different area, Merced. Completely different community, a lower income farming house. They were all packed into a small 2-bedroom farmhouse.
The cops wouldn't let up. They dragged their prime suspects in for questioning again and again, expecting that one of them would crack.
Laura was nonchalant about it. At times she would show emotion, but it was like a light switch. She could turn it off and on whenever she wanted. The number of times that we spoke to Eric, he was very defiant, very, I wouldn't say cocky or arrogant, but he just didn't care. And he just didn't want to be bothered by us.
As the months went by, Alberto's murder wasn't even close to being solved.
The case was at a point where we would say it's stale. The district attorney's office said you need some more, and we didn't know what more we could get. We thought we were at a dead end.
And then an email popped up from the cell phone company. Laura had deleted all the text messages on her cell phone the day of Alberto's murder. Might seem like a smart idea. What she didn't know was that the cell company keeps a record of them, deleted or not. And that's what was in the email.
The text messages were pretty alarming. There were text messages from Laura that said, let me know when it's done, saying, okay, I'm out of the house. I left the front door unlocked. There were text messages that said, okay, it's done. The murder was basically outlined verbatim for us in those text messages.
And guess who Laura was texting?
Oh, you Eric? Yeah.
That's right, Eric.
The only guilt that I ever saw Laura display in any of this was when she was being arrested. She began crying a little bit, saying that she was going to miss her kids. The rest of the emotions that I saw or anything were all about her.
At this point, everyone was thinking it was Eric who shot Alberto, while Laura was over at Karen's house cooking breakfast.
It made sense that it was Eric, only because he had showed up to the scene with his mom. Eric was quick to make the claim on the policy and that the phone belonged to him.
We believe through our investigation that Laura Hernandez, along with her son and the stepson of Alberto Macias, were responsible for his death. We also believe and that there was money involved. Hence, we're going to basically dub this the nearly $1 million murder.
Wait a minute. Not so fast. Just because it's on the evening news doesn't make it true. There's a lot more to this story than anyone knows. 3 months ago, Alberto Macias was murdered. Now, his wife Laura and stepson Eric are sitting in jail accused of killing him. And it was texts from their cell phones that put them there.
I remember reading those text messages over and over, and I had to kind of back up maybe to the day before and kind of just get an idea of who was really using the phone.
Turns out, there were 2 other names that showed up in the texts. One was Alberto's 15-year-old daughter, Maria. The other was Edgar, her boyfriend since 6th grade, and the guy who got her pregnant. Could the whole family be involved?
I had found some spots in the text messages where Edgar had mentioned his own name in the text messages that, hey, it's me, Edgar. And I thought maybe Edgar was the one that had the phone.
Edgar spent a lot of time with the family and probably knew all their secrets. He was definitely worth talking to.
Edgar was right off the get-go a very scared little boy who didn't understand the complexity of what he had just involved himself in.
The interview with Edgar was pretty lengthy. There was a lot of times during the interview where he wanted to say something and he would whisper something, but we couldn't understand what he was saying. Did you have a phone with you?
Was that a yes?
Edgar admitted he might have used Eric's phone the night of Alberto's murder, but only once or twice. And that's all he was saying.
You do know Edgar. You know who shot him.
He obviously knew more. Who was he protecting? Eric?
Sometimes he would start something, and then he'd stop himself. And I remember Detective Hale asking him, would you feel better if you wrote it on a piece of paper? And he slid over the piece of paper to him with a pen. Edgar picked up the pen. I remember we kind of looked down to see what he was going to write because we just wanted, we were so excited to know that he was about to tell us something. And he put his pen on the paper. He paused for a second, set it back down, and then pushed it back over to Detective Hale. And I remember we were like, he's getting close. He's getting close to telling us. We just got to keep questioning him some more.
It looked like it was going to be a long night.
So you need to look both of us in the eye and tell us the truth.
Finally, they asked Edgar one simple question, and he gave them one simple answer.
Did you shoot him, Edgar? You did. How many times?
The police had found the real killer. Edgar, not Eric, was the one who pulled the trigger. But Laura was the mastermind behind it all. After all the years Laura and Alberto had been together, she wanted him dead.
Alberto worshipped her. I don't think she returned that love. You could just tell the feeling wasn't there.
When I first met Laura, at first I liked her, but after that, it was something that changed, like in a matter of 2 weeks. She didn't want me to have no relationship at all with my mother.
Laura was very controlling person. Alberto, he loved her. He loved her unconditionally, and he figured that they would get over it. You know, they would work out the issues, and they would just move on and be happy.
I told Alberto, you need to get out of the relationship. Something is not right. And I cannot do it. I cannot do it. I love my family. I love my wife. I said, yeah, but this is real weird. I feel like something's going to happen to you.
Maybe Alberto didn't know Laura as well as he thought he did.
Laura is the one that planned the murder. She's the one that directed people to do what they did. She picked the dates, she picked the times, picked the location. Everyone answered to Laura. There were all kinds of things, different ways that Laura manipulated her children.
Like money. She reminded Eric and Maria of the family's desperate situation.
Laura didn't have a job. Alberto was out of a job. There were kids in school. There were kids that needed clothes. There was no income to pay the bills.
Laura told them that Alberto felt terrible that he couldn't provide for the family. She said he wanted to die so that they could collect the insurance money and live a better life. Too bad no one checked with Alberto about that.
Laura told the kids that Alberto had tried to commit suicide several times because he knew about the life insurance policies. However, he didn't have enough courage to commit suicide.
So, if that's what Alberto wanted, someone needed to help him. Or maybe the whole family should do it. It was time for Laura to exploit her children's weak spots.
Eric's motivation for assisting or helping to commit this crime was merely the money. He wanted to help pay for his own education and the education of his brother and sisters.
And how did Laura get to Maria? She and Edgar were in love. They wanted to start a family, and her mother used that against her.
Maria was afraid that Laura was not going to allow Edgar to see, number one, see the kid when it was born, move her to Mexico, and or abort the baby.
That's all it took. Now Maria and Eric were on board.
Edgar, come here.
But like any good mom, Laura wasn't about to let one of her own kids pull the trigger. She needed someone else to do that. Edgar. Laura hated Edgar. She hated that he got Maria pregnant, and she hated that Alberto always liked him. He wasn't even part of the family. But that wasn't a problem for Laura. She could get to him too.
I think Laura saw how much Edgar loved Maria, and she knew that she could get him to do it.
He feared the threats by Laura to make Maria have an abortion and take Maria to Mexico to where Edgar could never see her again. Edgar was like a tool in a garage. He was there so she could use him. It was almost as if Edgar was disposable to her.
I know you really love me.
Edgar and Maria, they both cried about it and that he didn't want to go through with it.
You better.
Laura would constantly tell Edgar every time he came over to visit that he needed to do it. He needed to kill Alberto.
When Laura couldn't talk Edgar into it, she bribed him.
I have something to offer you. $5,000.
He was getting $5,000.
If you do the job.
$5,000 to someone that's a teenager might seem like a lot of money, but I think that the main thing here was he wanted to be with Maria and he wanted to have his child.
So Edgar decided to go along with Laura. He was afraid of her. It's highly unusual to find a case such as this where everyone in the family's involved, and to have the mother basically team up with her own children to commit the murder of a stepfather and a husband is unheard of to me.
What a wife. And what a mom. Laura's actually using her kids to kill her husband. But she should know, you never send your children to do your dirty work. They'll screw it up every time. Apparently, Laura Hernandez didn't take her marriage vows very seriously, especially the part about for richer or poorer. Right now, she's planning to kill her husband Alberto to get her hands on his life insurance money, and the entire family is involved in her plot.
This case was definitely premeditated. The plan started unfolding for them at least 2 weeks earlier when Laura decided to stay with Alberto. She was tired of living in poverty. She didn't want to lose her home. She didn't want to have to do without. She didn't even want to be in Dos Palace with Alberto, but she had to be there to set the stage for this crime.
The house Alberto was fixing up for his family was small and cold and out in the middle of nowhere. But Laura said she loved it and couldn't wait to move in. And Alberto believed her.
Great job.
Me knowing Laura, she will never stay in a place like that. Because she was real particular about things.
She was a city girl. She liked a big fancy house. She would have never moved out here.
Hey.
Hi.
She went there to make sure that he was in a certain place at a certain time by himself so this could happen. You can't get any more premeditated than that.
Laura had stashed away money from Alberto's unemployment check to buy a gun. That means Alberto's paying for his own murder. But it was Edgar's job to get the gun.
The first gun that he had purchased was a small caliber pistol that he had bought on the streets of Merced.
But that one wasn't good enough for Laura.
He took it to Laura and showed it to her, and she told him to go take it back to where he'd gotten it and go buy a bigger one, that one wouldn't do the trick. That would just hurt him. So he eventually went out and bought a larger caliber handgun.
Laura had more than one plan about where and when to kill Alberto. But as the days went by, Edgar just wasn't getting the job done.
He tells us about showing up to the house a day before or a couple days before they killed him, and he couldn't go through with it. Edgar knew what he was doing was wrong.
Laura didn't let up. Until one night, Edgar felt there was no way out. The setup was perfect. Laura and Alberto would have dinner with Karen next door, and when they left to go home, Alberto would be ambushed by an unknown assailant. Edgar had failed before, and Laura didn't trust that he would go through with it this time. So, Eric went along to make sure the job was done right.
Eric had a car. Eric was the wheels. He was the smart kid, for lack of a better term. I don't believe that Eric thought that they would ever get caught.
But why was Maria there? For moral support? 9 o'clock went by, then 10, then 11. Alberto wasn't in any hurry to leave.
She was with him that night. He hugged her and just showed a lot of attention to her. I never would have guessed that she had in her mind to kill him. But she certainly fooled us, didn't she?
Laura kept getting messages on her phone, and Alberto figured she was just texting the kids. That's true. She was. She was setting up Alberto to die.
Here it is 11:30, and they're still at Karen's house. Little did Alberto know that Eric and Maria and Edgar were lying in wait for him at the Azusa Roadhouse to actually carry out the murder that night. It got too late, and Laura eventually told them to go home.
Without knowing it, Alberto had just added a few hours to his life. Laura, of course, was furious that another chance to kill her husband had been wasted. But she had a backup plan for the next day. A gun was Edgar's weapon. Laura's was a cell phone. She directed the entire murder, all by text. Alberto wasn't feeling well that morning, and Laura insisted that he take some flu medicine. Lots of flu medicine to help him sleep. She didn't trust Edgar to pull the trigger if he had to look Alberto in the eye.
Eric, Edgar, and Maria were parked down the street, just waiting for Laura's cue to start their plan. Before Laura even left the house, there was some text messages that Alberto was still awake. And then later on, she tells him that he'd fallen back asleep, which was Edgar's cue.
He did what Laura told him to do. He put on the gloves and entered the house through the door that she had left unlocked. And he waited for the signal. The flu medicine was working. It was time for Laura to establish her alibi, which meant it was time to cook breakfast. Off she goes to Karen's house.
While she was at the house cooking breakfast, eggs and toast, which took almost an hour, she was text messaging Edgar, advising him that it was clear for him to go in and commit the murder. Alberto was kind of startled and woke up.
He looked Edgar right in the eye.
He pointed the gun at him and pulled the trigger, shooting him once. He then text messaged Laura and told her that it was done.
Now, Laura knew she was cooking breakfast for a dead man. Edgar sneaks out of the house, jumps into the getaway car, and the three of them head for home. Alberto is dead. Or is he? The murder of Alberto Macias was a family affair, organized by his wife, Laura. The motive was money. Seems like there might have been a better way to solve their financial problems. Edgar Garcia has confessed to shooting Alberto.
Did you come at him with a gun? Yes. What was he trying to do?
He was trying to get it.
What was he saying?
It was just like that.
He didn't think about, I'm actually committing a murder, or I'm actually taking someone's life, even though he did. And he was remorseful for it. He knew what he did was wrong. But the only thing he was focused on was his girlfriend and his unborn child.
And now it was Maria's turn to answer some questions.
During her interview, she was very emotional. She was crying a lot.
And women ended up pregnant.
When we asked the questions about knowing about Edgar killing Alberto, she didn't deny it. And I knew that she knew a lot more than what we initially thought.
Maria said the morning of the murder, she was terrified for Edgar. He was in that house a long time, and she thought something had gone wrong.
Once Edgar committed the shooting and they were driving back to Merced, they began to talk about what had actually happened in the house. Edgar explained to both Eric and Maria that he'd fired the gun once and that Alberto had actually woken up during this crime.
So it's done. Eric asked if Alberto was dead, but Edgar wasn't so sure.
What do you mean you don't know? How am I supposed when I shot him?
We have to go back. What? We have to go back.
That's when Maria panicked. What if Alberto was still alive and knew Edgar had shot him?
Eric decided to turn around so that Edgar could go back into the house and shoot him again, just to make sure that he was dead.
The last thing Edgar wanted was to go back to the scene of the crime.
When he got back to the house, he exited the car, went back into the house, stood over him in a different location, and fired the gun a second time, shooting him again.
Turns out, that second trip was a waste of time.
There was no reason for them to come back. Both gunshot wounds to the head were fatal.
That's what you call overkill. They drove away again, and Maria texted Laura one last time.
That text message is Maria letting her mother know that she did it for her because she loved her.
Laura headed back to the house with 2 plates of food and smiled at Joe on her way. All part of the act, but it wasn't a very good performance. Laura tried to act shocked when she saw Joe, and sad when Karen saw her rubbing Alberto's legs. But she really didn't fool anyone. Following orders from Laura, Edgar went home and took a shower, and then they went to dispose of the gun.
At some point later that afternoon, Eric and Maria and Edgar had taken a drive over on the east side of Merced and threw the gun into a ditch that was overgrown with weeds. We never found it.
Laura just wasn't smart enough to commit the perfect crime. She should have known deleting her texts wouldn't make them go away.
You could see it clearly in the text messages that she was in charge of what was going on. Laura wanted him dead.
She should have pretended like she cared.
We tell her she's a suspect, and she's not bawling her eyes out. She's not screaming, crying. She's showing no emotion that you would normally see from a wife whose husband has just been murdered.
She was way too anxious to get her hands on that life insurance money.
They hadn't even found out where his body was at or what was going to happen to him, and they're already calling and asking about the life insurance money.
And why would you send teenagers to commit a murder?
She could have killed Alberto without involving the children. You know, she could have poisoned him. She could have pushed him in front of a truck. There's 100 ways she could have gotten rid of him without involving the children. But to have them come and participate in the actual murder was just inconceivable to me.
This is a black widow with a big red spot on it. She used her children to kill her husband. Who does that? She didn't care about her children. She obviously didn't care about her husband. She was only concerned with herself.
After she was arrested, Laura had the chance to do the right thing. She was offered a deal. If she admitted the murder was her idea, Eric and Maria would be given lighter sentences. But what did Laura do?
She didn't take that deal. She refused to. I don't think that there's any kind of mother that could actually call themselves a mother that would do anything like this. She put her children in harm's way. She basically ransomed each one of their lives. She's not willing to sacrifice anything for anyone. It's all about Laura.
If Laura was going down, they were all going down.
All the evidence piled up. There was no way around that. There was too much evidence to dispute.
Laura Hernandez, Eric Hernandez, and Edgar Garcia all pled no contest to Alberto's murder. Maria was tried as a juvenile and was sent to a detention facility. Almost everyone she loved was taken from her, even her baby.
It was pretty sad. At the end of our interview, I asked Maria if there was anything else that she wanted to tell us before we left.
I'm sorry?
Like you.
I love you, even?
I think it can all hit Maria that how could a mother that loves her child so much ask her to do such an evil thing?
Edgar lost Maria and his baby, but at least he got paid for the murder.
Instead of giving Edgar $5,000, which she couldn't do, Laura gave Edgar Alberto's car. That was his payment for actually pulling the trigger and killing Alberto Macias.
But it'll be a long time before Edgar gets to drive that car. He was sentenced to 21 years in prison. And what about Eric, the first in the family to go to college? He was sentenced to 6 years. No doubt he'll be at the top of his class, behind bars.
He gave up his life to do this crime, and now it's going to be much harder for him to have that glowing future that was his to be had.
Knowing he would never see his mother again, Eric had only one request. He wanted a hug.
He felt that everything that he did was for his mom. And up until the day he was arrested and taken to jail, it was all about his mom.
It amazed me that she put her kids in his position, and then at the last day in the courtroom, her son wanted to hug his mom because he'd probably never see her again, like a puppy, loyal no matter what.
I'm angry because she took a man away from a family that really cared about him. All he did was love her and treat her right and care for her and take care of her and cater to her, and for her to do something like that over money, that's just not right. I don't understand how she can put money first.
For her part in the crime, Laura got 15 years to life. What she didn't get was Alberto's life insurance money.
I miss him a lot. I miss being around him. And I don't know why she did this, but I hope to God she just paid for what she did.
Alberto's body was cremated, and his ashes were kept in a box in Laura's living room.
They actually had the cremated remains of a man that they had helped kill in their house.
The family was careful to sprinkle black ash around the box.
I was told that this particular type dust was used to keep evil spirits and demons contained within something and not let them out.
Maybe they were feeling guilty, or maybe they were afraid that Alberto would come back and haunt them. Maybe they should be